Hello, everybody. My name is Ron, and this is Just a Little Guy, a podcast in which I collaborate with some of my favorite folks from all around the world to whip up a brand new batch of beasties for all your creative needs. Before we get started today, I just wanted to express my gratitude to all of the patrons who help make our show possible, especially those who contribute at the incomprehensible cosmic abomination level. Special thanks go out to Taru Tikkanen, D. Solari, and Lunchbox. Thank you for all the support, and if you'd like to help fund the collective creativity, feel free to mosey on down to patreon.com/justalilguy. That's lil as in late intrusive lachrymose. Today's guest is a video essayist and media critic. He's the host of Wholesome Halloween and a creative advisor on the upcoming documentary In Search of Darkness 1990-94. He's also working on a horror game documentary called Terrorbytes, which you can check out at the link in the description. And please be sure to fill out the survey conveying your interest in the project. Please welcome to the show, Dan Drambles. Hey Dan, how's it going today?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you very much. So you are, as I said in the intro, you're a video essayist, and you have this project coming up called Terrorbytes. Would you like to talk a little bit about that right at the start here, so we can get as many people into the survey as possible?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So I'm working with Creative VC, who are the team behind the massive, blockbuster documentary franchise In Search of Darkness, which is this huge horror documentary undertaking. It's like 15 hours long now across 3 films, with a 4th film on the way that I'm a creative advisor on. And it was the first 3 were looking at 80s horror. The 4th one's going to look at 90s horror. And these are like massive retrospectives that feature like absolute icons like John Carpenter and Robert Englund and Elvira, and getting all of their takes and all of the behind the scenes info from them, while intercutting with great motion graphics and scenes from the films, and really giving it that kind of like context and examining the cultural impact and stuff. And I am development producer on what is going to be the first In Search of Darkness spin-off, and that is Terrorbytes. In Search of Darkness presents Terrorbytes, which will take us into the realm of horror video games. And I'm very, very excited about it. We're going to look at the evolution of horror games, going all the way back from like 3D Monster Maze all the way up to something like The Last of Us. And we're going to do it all the way along, talking to the developers, talking to creature designers, talking to voice actors. And yeah, it's just going to be a real rad time. But what we need at the moment to make sure we get this thing off the ground is we've put out a landing page website where you can register your interest and you can see the trailer. You'll be seeing the trailer early if you go on it now, because we haven't gone public with the trailer outside this website, and we're not pushing the website just yet. So you'll be, depending on when this goes out, you might be one of the first to see the trailer. So if you go to creativec.com/terabytes, and that's spelled TERRORBYTES. So like, you get the pun. And yeah, if you look on there, there's like a synopsis, there's a trailer, and there's a survey for you guys to fill in, where you can say what you want to see in the documentary, what obscure games we should check out, what are your favorite franchises. And we read like every single one of them, and we've already had some of those responses kind of inform some of the directions we'll take the documentary in. So yeah, it's genuinely, like, not even exaggerating, this is a huge franchise. It's genuinely a chance to be a part of horror gaming history. So check that out.
Absolutely. I really loved, I think it was they did the same documentary there that was like all of the 80s horror movies. I think it's on Shudder, right?
In Search of Darkness.
In Search of Darkness.
All 3 parts were on Shudder. I think part 1 might have been took off the US Shudder, but I'm not sure because I am not there. But yeah, we were on Shudder. We were on Shudder for a long time. I think they had an exclusive deal with us for a while. But yeah, and hopefully we can make Terrorbytes as well. That'd be rad.
Yeah, no, that'd be absolutely awesome. I mean, there's obviously like a bunch of games out there that I mean, this my audience, these folks watching at home, they love the horror games. They can't get enough of the spoopy, creepy stuff that happens, when you're walking down a dark hallway and they got the tank controls and the,
Oh, we love tank controls. We love tank controls.
Tank controls, they sure do make it a lot scarier. Have you guys, out of curiosity, what's the possibility that we get something about what's that game there from the GameCube that was like really popular?
Eternal Darkness?
That's the one.
No spoilers, but almost 100%.
All right, awesome. That's great. So yeah, everybody go fill out that survey. I'm going to do it right after this interview is over because that's what I do in my spare time as I go and I do surveys for my friends, as should you. Okay. Moving right along. So I kind of alluded to this before we got started, but I'm going to ask you a couple of questions about like just your background in horror in general, like what kind of monsters you like. So, out of curiosity, do you remember what is your earliest memory in regards to the horror genre? What's the first thing that really stuck?
So it's honestly that it's like a choose your own adventure narrative whenever anybody asks me that question, because every time someone asks me it, my brain flicks between several conflicting memories where I think all of them are my first memory of horror, but that's literally impossible. So a couple that stick out in my head is I remember I had gotten a small CRT TV in my room, and I'd never had a TV in my room before. I always had to use the TV downstairs in the living room because we didn't have enough money for multiple TVs.
Right.
And one night when I'd just gotten this TV in my room, Scream came on. I think it was on like ITV or something, which is a channel over here. And I remember thinking, as I started to watch it, oh, I shouldn't be watching this, because I was way too young to be watching Scream.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember looking at it and being like, this is super compelling though and super interesting. And I remember kind of sitting and I was like, well, the TV is in my room, so nobody's going to know because I'm not downstairs where everybody can see what I'm watching. And so the film became way scarier because I was watching it and feeling like I shouldn't be watching it. And the entire time sort of like keeping one eye on my bedroom door to make sure like my mom didn't walk in and catch me watching this like horrendous, like what felt like some kind of insidious snuff film at the time to a like 7-year-old kid who was observing it for the first time. So that's like a really vivid memory that sticks out in my head. And I remember even feeling so guilty that I'd watched it that I kind of like brought it up with my mom later, but like in a very like casual way. Like I walked into her room and I was like, "Oh yeah, mom, there was this like film on like TV or something. It was like, I think it was called Scream or something. I don't know. Like I guess I watched it, but it wasn't like scary or anything. It wasn't like too bad and like sort of like
I
really
wasn't
trying to
that
like
frightened
downplay
by it.
Yeah. And as far as I recall, she just kind of like rolled her eyes or like paid us no attention. But I remember like really trepidatiously approaching the subject of like, Mom, I've just watched Scream. And then the other one I remember is we didn't have cable at home for most of my, childhood and teen life. We didn't have any form of TV outside of the core. In England, you get 5 channels. It's BBC One, I want to say BBC 2, ITV, Channel 4, and Channel 5. Oh. And that's all we had for the longest time. And so I never got any exposure of anything outside of the confines of those channels. And then my nana got Sky, which was like a huge thing at the time. Like people at school kept being like, oh yeah, we got the Sky dish. And it was like, you got Cartoon Network, you got Nickelodeon, you got Disney, you got Sky One, so you could watch SmackDown. That was the one I really wanted to get. And I remember going to my nana's because it was like an event of like everybody go around Nana's, she's got Sky. And so we'd go around my Nana's. And I remember like when everybody went out to go in the kitchen and have a conversation, I was the only one left in the room with the Sky remote, this fabled artifact of power that gave me control over these hundreds, this seemingly infinite number of channels. And I remember discovering Kerrang, and I remember I'd had a spooky video on at one point, and I was like, this is compelling, this is interesting. And I kind of, Kerrang's like, I don't know if you guys
like
get
a
it.
metal, right?
Yeah, like rock metal. And I was like, oh, this is awoken something in me. Like, I think I'm going to be a little goth when I grow up. And then we got Fox Kids, and Fox Kids had Goosebumps on. And I was like, this is very cool. This is very interesting. And it was like the kind of horror where I was like, this is tickling a part of my brain where I'm like, this is kind of dangerous and kind of scary and on the edge of the entertainment I would normally watch. But it was acceptable to watch in front of my mom. And that was kind of the sweet spot for us. So yeah, the Goosebumps and Scream are like two big early memories of horror that stick out for us. But there's probably, ask us next week, I'll give you 4 different answers, you know?
No, absolutely. I totally get that. Like, whenever I'm asked anything about that, I go back and forth between Tales from the Crypt. My mom used to stay up real late. See, so we had cable for a lot of the time growing up. We lived with my grandparents and, my parents and stuff like that. And they, had cable. And my mom would stay up really late and watch Tales from the Crypt every week. So I would routinely stay up with her and watch these shows and not really understand what's going on. Just be like, hey, look, it's the Crypt Keeper. That's really cool. Why isn't he in the rest of the episode? And then the other one that sticks with me the most is Pet Sematary 2. Specifically the part where the dog is sitting on top of the guy when he's having that nightmare or whatever. And that was horrifying for me. Yeah. But that's really cool. I could totally relate to the feeling like you shouldn't be watching something and like, oh God, I hope my mom doesn't like walk in while I'm seeing Drew Barrymore being murdered by, one of
Evil,
2 people.
The first Resident Evil was another one. I remember I stole my older brother's little sleeve. You remember when people used to keep their discs in those like sleeves, and it was like I stole them and I was like flicking through and I come across Resident Evil. And that one was particularly terrifying in terms of the guilt because this was when I had a small TV downstairs but not in my room, and so my mom was kind of like doing ironing or something, or it was like in the living room and she was kind of doing something and toddling around or like reading a book in the corner, and so she was in the room while I was playing Resident Evil, but I wasn't letting her know that I was playing Resident Evil. So I remember like I had this little small CRT monitor and I'd kind of like turned it away from her and I'd put headphones on and like turned the volume right down just in case she had the headphones, and I was playing like side-eyeing her, and then the game was like terrifying to us at the time. And it wasn't the dog that got us, because everybody gets got by the dog the first time, but I'd heard about the dog. I'd read about the dog in magazines. I knew the dog was coming. I knew where it was going. There's a bit where it's in the room with the statue and there's 2 doors at the back, and you go through one door and there's a zombie on the ground and you have to go past and grab the key. And as you go past, it just suddenly bites your ankle. Oh my God. I vividly remember the feeling of my heart beating out of my chest, but I couldn't scream and I couldn't do anything because my mom would then be like, why are you playing those violent games? Like, this is a woman who once took a PlayStation magazine off me. She confiscated it because it talked about nightmare creatures. Didn't have any violent screenshots or anything. It just had some information about some violent act that happened in Nightmare Creatures, where they were saying, oh yeah, you can like stab this monster or whatever. And she was like, this is sick and disgusting. She took it away. So I'm like on edge. But I remember getting that zombie jump scare and just involuntarily pausing the game and just holding my controller in this like iron grip claw
Yeah.
and staring at the pause screen and me health bar and like not wanting to move for fear that my mum would ask us what I was doing. And I must have stayed there just like vividly shaking for about 10 minutes.
Wow.
And that was good time. That's good time.
That's effective, like that's effective horror right there when you can make somebody sit there for 10 minutes and just like abject, just frozen. So wow.
It was more a fear of getting caught by my mother than it was of the zombies. I just didn't want it to get confiscated off us.
Absolutely.
But I couldn't play Resident Evil for ages after that. I was like too scared to play it. It took me a long time to come back around to Resident Evil.
Well, I still haven't beaten it, so there's that. I not for like lack of opportunities. I'm a big old chicken when it comes to horror games. So our first monster name, as produced by the Monstermatic 5000, is the Festerling. So what kind of images come to mind when you think of the word Festerling?
Okay, so Festerling's definitely like disease and decay. My thoughts in my head are split in two directions. Does this creature exist as a embodiment of that disease and decay? So I'm thinking like some kind of bubonic plague riddled, watered, goopy, almost like melting kind of abomination that acts as this kind of physical mounds of flesh and hideousness. Or is it more insidious and it's something that gets into your body and creates festering wounds on you? And I kind of think the former is more in line with the name, but I think the second one is more interesting. And I think it was Festerling, right?
Yeah, like as in Zergling, kind of thing.
Okay, so Festerling, the ling kind of gives it like hatchling vibes. So I kind of like the idea of a creature that gets inside of its victim and festers within them, and then births from the sort of boils and grisly viscera that it spawns on their bodies.
I like that as well. And honestly, when I was thinking about it, I'm friends with Mildred from Thought Slime, and their favorite thing is like wet puppets. So that was immediately what came to mind.
Puppets.
Yeah.
They love a good wet puppet.
Just very
big fan of Thought Slime. They did me a real solid Plug and Wholesome Halloween one.
Oh, did they? Oh man.
Yeah, I was in the eyeball zone.
Oh my gosh, maybe that's where I heard about it the first time. No, but that's awesome. But yeah, that's what it made me think of was like scaredy cats and wet puppets. So I like the idea of it being like something that, like you said, gets inside you, like creates all these wounds and like visceral, like just awfulness. So my question is, do you view this thing as more of like a virus, or like, because I see it as like, and I think you said like a hatchling kind of thing, so maybe I'm not.
I think it's not a virus because I don't think that's a visually compelling creature. Mm-hmm. It has to have a physical form, but it can be kind of like almost like the alien sort of face hugger implantation kind of thing, and then it grows into a chest burster. It's a creature that is sort of like an insidious little gremlin-y rat-like thing, and it burrows into your body, and it's once it's in your body that it kind of becomes the sort of namesake of the Festerling.
Nice. I like that thought there. I was kind of picturing it like kind of like you said, like the little gremlin. Like I was thinking for some reason, did you guys have those ads over there for? I can't think of what the brand is right now, but it was like this cream that you're supposed to put on your feet in case your toenails get like infected or something like that. And they had like these little monsters that would like, I don't know, they were like mischievous and stuff like that. They like lift up the toenail and like jump inside and all that stuff. It was fucking disgusting.
Did not. That sounds
you
bizarre.
Didn't have
It's weird.
Yeah. So
I am not unhappy that we missed out on that one.
Yeah, so they're like these little yellow guys that look like, little gremlins basically, and they just, like I said, just lift up the toenail. Like, it's not even like it's like looks painful for the person with the toenail, but they like
Sounds painful.
It sounds awful.
Sounds horrendous.
This is apparently what infected toenails feel like. But that's kind of what I pictured, was like this little like squat little dude who's like also again kind of gremlin-y. Do you think it would also be covered in like pustules and stuff like that? Like, or is it like
yeah, 100%. Like you can see it as a product of disease and bile, like on site. You can see it as a product of like, if you think of it as like almost like a plague rat, but those like really exaggerated caricatures of plague rats where their eyes are like bulging and their mouths are like foaming and they're like twitchy and like that kind of thing, but obviously not rat shaped necessarily, just rat like in its behavior, and it wants to nest in you. I suppose if I can ask you a question,
of course,
I would say, what is this monster about, if that makes any sense? And so what I mean by that is like, I write a lot of like horror, I've wrote like horror films and stuff, and like I've got like a few screenplays like out there, and for me the way I would write a monster is to not design the monster first, it's what am I trying to say with the monster. So like, for example, right now I am writing a feature about that's kind of like The Descent, but set during the miners' strike of the 80s in Britain, called Scabs.
Cool.
And so what happens is a bunch of scabs who cross the picket line and go into the mines end up trapped after a cave-in, and there's monsters in the cave-in, and the monsters in the cave-in, the way I've wrote them at the minute is they are these like blue jellyfish things, and they have these like tendrils, these really thin tendrils, and like go through the sort of like the microscopic like holes in your skin, and the like melt through you, and the sort of like take over your nervous system and puppeteer you.
That's fucking
and then
cool.
And then they'll work you to death.
Oh wow!
So you literally, and for me, they exist not because the monster came first, but because I was like, how can I comment on the Tories working people to death in the 80s over through the miners' strikes? And that was the concept that was came up with. So that was that blue, because that was the color of
the Tories.
the Tory party. Not to get too political, by the way.
That's okay.
Like,
we've had all
like
sorts
that that monster sort of represents something. So I would say to you, like, what are we doing with the Festerling? What's it about? Because that'll inform how it looks and how it functions.
To me, it's like, it's kind of like an easy thing to say with like something like plague or something like that, but it's like the corruption of like just anything that it touches. It's kind of like what's the word I'm looking for here? I struggle with
rot.
Yes, rot. Like it's like decay of like I guess of society kind of thing.
Okay.
To me, it's maybe like how. Okay, so here's what I'm picturing. You know how right now we are living in an age with like social media and things like that, where people are bombarded just constantly with like awful news story after awful news story, to the point where like they become apathetic to just about anything happening around them because they can't affect it, and like it leads to like depression skyrocketing and like all kinds of stuff like that. I'd say this guy might be something like that, but I'm interested in what you have to say as well.
Going off of that, I got an idea for you then. So it's not a creature that the biggest threat from it is that it rots you physically, although it should do that.
Yes.
It should rot the mind when it gets in. So you, as the infection takes over, you start to behave erratically. And you become sort of one of their hive. in one of their groups. So if you can imagine, and they should exist in clusters because they'll represent the kind of like overload of like information that just like rots you from the inside out. So they don't exist as like one isolated creature. They are like these horrible.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with rat kings? It's
Yes,
a really
very
gross
much.
concept.
Yeah,
Yeah,
where they
so
all get
they're
linked
like a
together with
rat
a
king.
tail. Yeah.
Yeah, they're like a rat king. They're like this really gross concoction of all these like sometimes tied up, sometimes individual, but always in packs. Little gnarly bubonic plague carrying bile and viscera riddled creatures.
Yeah.
And they burrow inside of you in a very violent manner, and they infect you. But it's not your body that goes first; it's your mind. And as your mind goes, you become. If we think of it as like a metaphor for like radicalization, you begin to adopt their mannerisms, even though you aren't one of them yet. So when you encounter a pack of these things, there is a chance that within all these like hideous little gremlins, there will also be like some human crawling around that's kind of like frothing at the mouth, that's like halfway gone. And that can be kind of like the indoctrination process, and then eventually as the bile and wounds open up and you become this like gaping mass of hives and all of the horrible things that can happen to skin and flesh, you would then emerge from this kind of almost, it makes your body into like this cocoon, of hatred that swells up a creature of hatred and malice that then emerges from the cocoon. And that can kind of be like a kind of sort of ideological, it can sort of be a metaphor for like the way like ideologies take hold of people and rot them from the inside and keep them in this cocoon of like self-isolation, because they will, you'll leave your party to go sit with the rats and stuff, until eventually there's nothing left of the original person there, and they are this just husk of bile and venom.
Absolutely. I like that thought. I think it sounds really good, especially for, again, the message that we're going for here. So we've established that, like, so are we talking about like literally a husk, like it's just a skin suit crawling around afterwards, or do we think that it also like evolves into like one of these, or the people would eventually evolve into like
It's like a
one of those
part. It's
rat
like a
things?
process. It's a process. So like you exist as a person at first, but you become like this frothing mad person. You start to believe, even in ways that you can still verbalize English, even though these creatures can't, but you believe you are one of the pack. And maybe that's like a thing. Maybe like a telltale sign of like infection is you don't just start mumbling nonsense, but you're mumbling a quite a specific nonsense. You're like, you kind of frothing at the mouth and like rocking back and forth, and you're like, I'm one of the pack, one of the pack, one of the pack, one of the pack, one of the pack. Gotta find the pack, gotta find the pack. And then you kind of like sort of burrow your way into their community, where they like welcome you because they know you're infected, and they're like, oh, we can cultivate this. And so you are just this sort of tattered, clothed human writhing in amongst all these rats and like gremlin-y rats, like you're one of them. Eating the things they eat and like spitting at the things they spit at. And as this rot takes hold, your body kind of contorts and morphs into something that's less and less human, until eventually this a grosser form or a stronger form of the rat, and the rat gremlin thing that initially burrowed into you emerges from you, and at that point it is just this skin suit that's left behind. But the because you basically became a human cocoon, but the skin suit, by the time that a thing emerges from it, barely looks human itself.
Nice. That's a great metaphor for the message that we're going for here. So I like that. What else would I add to this? Do we think that just the rats like get weaker as time goes on, and that's why when the first one, like when it emerges from people, that it's like a stronger variety of the rat?
They get weaker when their community loses members, and so they keep trying to cultivate and infect as many people as they can and bring more into the fold, because if their community diminishes, then they have less power as a whole. That easier to defeat. There's less of a, again, if we equate it to ideology, there's less of a voice behind there. There's less of a stance in like public conversation. And so if they represent ideology, like the thing that destroys them is essentially like, in a way, like deplatforming them, like getting rid of that ideology and removing it from conversation. Obviously, it's not ideology though; it's puss.
Yeah.
To put it bluntly. But you get it. But like, yeah, it's the cure for the infection is to like cut off any sort of interaction with that infection until it just becomes this echo chamber that starves itself to death.
Right, exactly. That makes a lot of sense. You just kind of like quarantine them or something to that effect, and then
Yeah.
Yeah,
And eventually they'll just all turn on each, like in that isolation, they'll all just turn on each other and start infighting.
right. I imagine then that since they're kind of rat like, they have like kind of like sharp claws and maybe like the big teeth kind of thing going on there. Or sorry, gremlin-y.
No,
No?
no, because I think it's grosser and more violent to be stabbed with a toothbrush than a knife. And so
That's very true.
they should have claws, but they're not sharp. They're kind of like, almost like at the very sharpest, they're like maybe like dog paws, but they're like rotted, and like as they're pawing at you, there might even be like nails come loose because they're like basically like falling apart at the seams. And they'll claw into you not with like surgical precision, because that's what sharpness would give them. They will like chew at you with like blunt, like almost like human teeth, like you are steak. Like they don't stab, they tear. They like attack your stomach or any entry point so rapidly and with such force that it's blunt force trauma that opens you up, not a clean cut.
Gotcha. You didn't think they'd use like any kind of weapons or anything like that as well? Like, are they
Nah.
cognizant enough? No. Okay.
Nah, they are just they are just a community of bile and venom, and they know nothing else. They know nothing but they're like really hateful creatures. Like there's no joy in their lives whatsoever. There's no joy in being them. They just spit venom, infect, and bring into this infected community more and more of these creatures, and just have no goal, no sort of tangible goal other than to take over as many beings as they can.
Nice. That sounds like a pretty threatening monster to me. All right. So that is the Festerling. I don't know. Is there anything else you'd like to add to that, Dan?
I think that's pretty
well rounded.
I think it's pretty solid.
Yeah.
I think that's. They should be sick. They should be sick lots. They should constantly be puking.
Constantly puking. That's another
constantly
way.
Puking.
Constantly puking.
And that's another way to kind of like spread infection. Because I think the image of like some like horrible festering rat-like creature climbing on top of you and trying to claw through a cavity that it's making in your chest while vomiting in your face is real vile.
What? God, there was a movie where something like that was happening, and I can't remember what it was right now, but I'm picturing exactly, well, not exactly that, but like I remember there was like a zombie movie where they would like communicate the disease by throwing up on people. Maybe that's something that like I made up in my head, but yeah,
It
that
sounds
sounds
like something that
disgusting.
would exist already.
Yeah, but that's cool. All right, sweet. So Dan, as we kind of talked about, this show has a bit of a fan base, especially with people who like to play tabletop role playing games. And I'm curious if you have any experience with tabletop games, and if there's like any specific systems that you like, any stories you'd like to tell.
I have a strange relationship with tabletop, and I don't think it's an answer that to your question that either you or your audience are going to particularly enjoy. In that, I actively dislike them, which is weird for me because let's be honest, I look the type. Like I should like D&D, I should like RPGs. Everybody assumes that I play it. Like everybody in my life, now that it's a big thing since, you know, the Stranger Things boom and all that, everybody thinks like, oh well, Dan will play D&D, Dan will play tabletop.
Yeah.
And I have only ever had bad experiences playing it. And because it's something that I think that I would enjoy, I have tried it quite a lot with different DMs and different people, and I've just never ever enjoyed it. But that is entirely my fault. Like, I understand the value it has. I think it's a great world with full of like potentially great stories, and I get the uses and gratifications people who play it get out of it 100%, and it is entirely my failing. And the failing that holds me back is that I am a complete control freak when it comes to stories. I'm just very precious with how writing should unfold, what characters should do what, where people should end up, what goals should be made. And in a communal setting like that, where there's so many different variables that I can't control, I kept finding that I was getting into these situations where I'd sort of grumpily kind of sit in the corner and thinking to myself, like, his character wouldn't do that. Her character shouldn't be doing that. And then, like, you know, I found myself kind of like fighting the DM because I was like, you know, my person needs to die right now in this forest because that's the best story. And the kind of fight is on that and be like, no, we've still got like 7 weeks of game left, dude. You can't just kill yourself.
Hangman Page can't win the title here. He has to win it here.
No, absolutely. It was very much that. Like, I armchair booked tabletop games, and it killed all joy of them for us. But having said that, I respect the kind of reality that they exist in the world. So it's so dumb and it's so weird, and I don't know why I've done this, but as a writing exercise, I will often write characters that I never intend to play, and their backstories and their adventures and all of that, just for myself. And it's just like a thing I do to relax sometimes. I mean, it's just an extension of writing. I write a lot. I really enjoy writing. But like my girlfriend once woke up to a text at 4 a.m. saying, "Hey, can't sleep. Here's a D&D character that I made. His entire backstory, arc, and conclusion that I never intend to play. Okay, love you." And then gave her just like reams and reams and reams of text. I didn't know WhatsApp had a limit on how many words you could send, but she had to click the read more button like 7 or 8 times to get to the bottom of that message. And like I found out it had a limit, and then I sent another one that was just as long. So I was really happy with that character and that story. I'm just never gonna do anything with it, but I can tell you it if you want.
No, absolutely, please. I mean, you're literally just doing like the just a little guy thing, where you're like, "Hey, here's a guy," you know.
Yeah, I got a little guy. Okay, so I'll try and remember it because it was quite a while ago when I said this.
Sure.
So like, I picture this character who is like a bard with really, really low stealth. And the reason he has really low stealth is he's this kind of paranoid conspiracy theory type. He's always suspicious of everything. And for some inexplicable reason that nobody knows why, he has covered himself in these wooden planks that make up his armor, full of just pictures of people he has painted on these wooden planks, and he wears this everywhere. And so when he's running along, it's just clank, 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 clank. So he's constantly getting his party caught, and his party are like always annoyed at him. And anytime they're like, dude, just take off the armor, just take off the armor, he's like, no, I will never take off this armor. And it just becomes like this really precious thing for him. He just fucking loves this armor. And anytime he's in like a fight and like a section of the armor gets damaged, he becomes like really reclusive and upset. And so I'd imagine this story where like he was very useful to the party, but he was always kind of like an outsider within it. Like everybody was like, oh yeah, the weird bard dude that we're hanging around with. Like he's cool, he's chill. But like we don't get this guy. He's odd. He's great to have when you're fighting orcs, but he's a bit of a bizarre dude. He's just a weird dude.
So
He's more
strange.
of a colleague than a friend.
Yeah.
But one of the party really, really, really warms up to him. Really, like,
there's always one.
gets to him, and they become really good friends. And at first, the guy with the wooden armor, the bard, I should probably give them names. Let's give him a name.
Billiam McBilliamson. Yeah, that sounds like a bard name. Not really.
Okay, so we'll go with Billiam for the bard, and the Leonis for the knight that what's it called, paladin or something.
I mean, that sounds like
friend. I don't.
Yeah, that sounds like a paladin name.
Leonis and Billiam. So Billiam's like really tries to push Leonis away and is like resistant to his friendship at first, but Leonis kind of like puts a chip in his armor and like breaks him down, and they sort of become really close like through their adventures and stuff, and they kind of become like the standout friendship of the group. And then one night after like a big adventure, they're all in the tavern, and the rest of the party have kind of like fallen into a drunken slumber, and it's just Billiam and Leonis who are sat in the tavern, and it's just like quiet night, and there's a fire just like sort of dancing in the background and licking their faces, and the moon shining through the tavern window. It's really like intimate setting. And Leonis leans over and is like, okay, now everybody else is asleep, just between you and me, right? What's the deal with the armor, dude? What's going on with the armor? And Billiam like loses his twitchy persona for just a bit. He kind of like lets his guard drop, and he looks at Leonis, and he opens his bag and pulls out a plank of wood, and he starts to paint on it. And he starts to tell Leonis a story while he paints, and he says like, okay, so years and years and years and years back when I was a kid, I had a very, very loving family. We didn't have much money. We lived in this small fishing village, but I had a great time. My childhood was excellent. It was just fantastic. Like, my mum was always playing with us, and she was like a sunshine in every day, and my dad was super loving. I had a great relationship with him. And it was just a really good time. And we didn't have much money, so I had to make my own entertainment quite a bit. And one day, while my parents were out down at the smithing market, I came across a gold coin. And I was a little dumb kid at the time. Like, I knew it had value, but I didn't understand what value it had. But a gold coin was rare for our family. It was left on the table. I just saw it as a plaything. So I took it and started to roll it around. Now, the one thing about my family that was peculiar, the one thing that didn't add up, is that everything was peachy, but there was a bedroom opposite my own that was boarded shut and nailed down tight. And I was always told when I was younger, and this was the only strange thing in my childhood, this was the only part that wasn't perfect. It wasn't bad, it was just weird. I was always told that whatever I did, I was never, ever, ever, ever to enter the room. Nobody was allowed to enter this room. And I always thought that's strange because none of the other kids like that I grew up with, like they didn't have a weird, boarded up room in the house. I thought it was like a normal thing, but apparently it wasn't. So anyway, one day I've got this coin and my parents are away and I'm playing on my bedroom floor and I'm just making little targets to kind of flick it into and I'm rolling it. And at one point I missed the little goalpost I've made really badly. And the coin rolls and it rolls and it rolls and it rolls and it rolls straight out of my bedroom door, across the hall and under the boarded up room. And I panic. I am like, oh shit. Again, I didn't know how much gold coins were worth, but I knew it was more than my family could spare. And I needed to get that coin back and I needed to put it on the table and I could not get found out about this. This was real issue for me. And I remember standing in front of that door, looking at this door that for years and years of my life, I'd been told, do not ever go in this room, no matter what you do. And I heard the coin come to a rattle and a rattle and a rattle and a rest just behind the door. And I remember looking at this door and it just felt like this dark castle that I wasn't supposed to enter. And so I knew though that I needed the gold coin back. So I looked under the creak of the door and I see this coin, but the coin isn't the thing that takes my attention, because just behind it I see something really unexpected. I see me. And I take a step back and this weird urge comes over me where I'm like, what the hell is that? I need to see what's in this room. So I look through the keyhole to try and get a better angle of it. And staring back at me from a different one this time, I see another me just stood still, staring at my face. Take a step back and I remember looking at the door and I don't know what came over us, but I just had this overwhelming urge of I needed to be in that room right now. I needed to see what was behind that door. Screw whatever consequences I had to deal with later. So I ran downstairs, I grabbed my dad's Smith and hammer, I ran to the room and I just smashed it open. And I kick open the door and shards of wood and bits of nails go everywhere. And I drop the hammer to my side. And I look in this room. And it's just a bedroom. There's nothing special about it. Apart from, it's dusty, it's unused, and it's riddled with family paintings all around the room. But the weird part is that in all of these family paintings of me, that was the me I saw through the keyhole and under the door frame, in all of these paintings, there's a stranger, a kid my age, kind of looks a little bit like me, and he is holding my mother's hand. He is on my dad's shoulders. He is playing on a rope by a creek with me in all of these pictures. And I have never seen this kid before in my life. And that's when I found the diaries. This kid, this was his room. And in these diaries, he wrote stories again and again and again, every day, until they suddenly cut off and stopped without warning. And in all of these stories, he tells of all of the days he spent with my mother and father. He calls me brother. He tells of all the adventures we'd go on. I have no idea what's going on. And that's when my parents come back into the room, back into my house, and they see me, and I think I'm going to be in trouble, but they just say sorry. And I don't understand what's going on. So they sit me down and they explain to me that within our village, there is a rumor of a monster called a false hydra. And this is a creature that doesn't just eat its victims, it eats the memory of them. And what they believe happened is that I had a brother, they had another son, who we all loved very much. And the false hydra somehow got him, and they couldn't remember him. And all they know about this kid is that one day, after a day out at the park, they brought me home by myself, their only son, and they found this bedroom and these diaries and all these pictures. And they realized, because they knew about the rumors of the false hydra that haunted the village, they knew what had happened, that they'd lost this son, and they didn't know how to tell me. And at that point, my mind just broke. And I proceeded to run into my room and write down details of every single person I knew and everything I loved. I wrote down descriptions of my mother's face, my father's face, all the things we'd done. I looked at those paintings of my brother again and again and again and again till I memorized every single facet of his being, and so I could try and remember the person I forgot. And I just became obsessed with preserving this memory I had lost. And then, if we can think of it in sort of film terms, we cut to the tavern, and he's still sort of painting on that plank. And he leans over to Leonis. I think that's what we called the guy.
Yeah.
And he leans over and he says, and you know what the worst part is? I don't know if any of this is true.
Dang.
Because I don't remember my parents. Everything I've just told you is assembled from mountains and mountains of notes that I carry around in this backpack. I don't know if any of this happened. I don't know if this is just a gentle lullaby a sad, lonely child told themselves when they were young to convince themselves that their parents hadn't forgotten them, they'd just forgotten their parents, because it was such a painful thing to think of growing up without them. I don't know if any of the people I've wrote about are real, or if they're just a lie that I've told myself to make myself believe that at one point I was happy, and at one point I had people who I could count on and who I loved. And he says, and this armor, he says, this is paintings of everybody who's ever meant something to me. And he says, I wear them every day with me. And he says, and some of them, maybe I made up. I don't know if I'm losing my mind. I don't know if this false hydra stuff has any water. I don't know if these people are real, because I don't remember them. But I like to think that they're real, because they're the only memories I have. The stories in my backpack and the faces on my skin. And he says, but one thing is definitely certain. He says, I did have a brother. Because this picture, and he lifts up a little wooden plank and he pulls out a piece of paper and he unfolds it. And it is a drawing from his brother's diary of him and his brother on an adventure, like a little shitty children's crayon illustration.
Little stick
with
figures.
His name, with his name above one of the characters and his brother's name above the other one. And he holds it up to Leonis and he goes, because I didn't draw this one. And he puts it back under his little flap and he picks up the wooden plank he was working on, puts a finishing touch on it, and he says, "But I did do this one." And he holds it up to Leonis, and it's a painting of Leonis. And he adds it to his armor, and he says, "Welcome to the family."
That's awesome.
And that would be like the story of their friendship. And I thought it would be really interesting as a kind of mechanic to explain any real people who were in the campaign who had to drop out halfway through.
Yeah.
Because suddenly this bard, Billiam, could go insane and be like, one of us is missing, and everybody would be like, what the fuck are you talking about? There's only ever been 5 of we. And he's like, no, there was 6 of we, and I know because I've got this picture. Look, I've drew a picture of all 6 of we. There is a 6th person. We are missing a 6th person. Someone's been taken. And they're just like, I don't know what you're talking about, dude. There's literally only ever been 5 of we. Crazy Billiam. Is that it again? That weirdo, that strange guy. And then I had the idea of his story would conclude. We would never find out if the false Hydra story was real. We would never find out if his family was real or anything. But he would die in some battle. He would die in some encounter, or some element of danger would take his life. And Leonis would be holding him as he's like breathing his last breath. And, you know, he's giving it all like, please, come on, like, you got to stay with me, don't leave me, you know, the general sort of stuff. And in amongst the pain of his death, Billiam gets this like moment of tranquility where he looks up at Leonis and he smiles, and he, with his last bit of strength, he takes out that little diary picture from before, and he puts it in Leonis's hands, and his last words are, "You remind me of him." And that's the end of his story. And I love the ambiguity of that ending, because you do not know what that statement means. Leonis could legitimately be his brother somehow.
Yeah.
There's also the possibility that he is saying, you are now a brother to me. Like, you have become my brother, like that through our friendship. Like, I'm glad I met you. I have got a brother now. And, or he could be saying, you know, like, I had a third thing. I can't think of it now. I've thought about it before. But, like, there's lots of, like, interpretations as to what "you remind me of him" could mean. Or, or it could be that in his moment of death, he is remembering his brother. Like, in his last dying moments, he remembers his brother. He looks up at Leonis, and he's like, he wants to let Leonis know, like, dude, I remember my brother, and I'm telling you this because you remind us of him.
Yeah.
And also there's the idea that Leonis brought back that memory through their friendship, because he's kind of cultivated the similar sort of friendship he had with his brother when he was younger. And then I had the idea, and this is why I can't this is why I can't do D&D, because I'm like, it has to hit these beats. These are the clear beats, and like the DM just won't play along with that. Like, I might not die in battle. I might fight a false Hydra. It needs to be ambiguous. I can't fight a false Hydra. And then I had the idea that, and this is the part where I can't play D&D because now I'm controlling other people's characters. I had the idea that Leonis would change his class to a bard, and he, at the end of Adventures Now, goes into taverns and he tells this exact same story to everybody he meets as this bard. He tells the story and it becomes a famous story, so that in Billiam's death, he leaves behind a world that remembers him. And if they remember him, as long as Leonis tells the story, people will remember Billiam. And if they remember Billiam, they'll remember his armor, because that's the key thing about him. It's like the dude with the weird wood armor. Yeah. And if they remember his armor, they remember the pictures. And if they remember the pictures, they remember the reasons behind the pictures, and they will remember his brother. And Billiam gets to leave behind a world that remembers the brother he forgot. And I think that's really cool.
That is such a beautiful and like compelling story, and I am really kind of bummed that you don't play, because like I would fucking love to experience that story like in
Do
game
it.
stuff.
Like, you've got my permission. Run it in something you're doing. Like, have him be an NPC.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not doing anything with this.
I was going to say, do you, if I mean, you're really busy and stuff like that. I was going to say, like, I could literally share this with my DM, and I'm sure he could work into it, work the character into it somehow. Or like, again, if you ever decide that you want to give it a shot, like I can say, hey, he's got this thing planned. He's like really good at like working with players. Like he doesn't mind. Like it seems like he's pretty open to like whatever, basically. So if it's okay with you, I'll share it with him. At the very
go
least,
for
the
it.
character will.
Like I say, like, the only thing I plan on maybe doing with this is an animatic.
Yeah.
Where it's just two characters. I know it was sort of talked about, like, I had an idea for, like, I was going to do, like, little episodes of, like, slice of life D&D things.
Yeah.
If I ever get round to it, this will be one of them. Just two characters talking in a tavern, and it's just, that's the story to tell.
I mean, it's a great scene, and yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I feel like I asked us a question though, and then I just talked for like 30 minutes straight about just the story pitch. So apologies for taking up so much time.
No, not at all. Please. I mean, I really like knowing more about, like, again, people's experiences, and even if, like you said, you don't play very much, it's great to know that like you have these wheels turning. Like it seems like you're a very creative person, and like I mean, I kind of established that from before when we were like just from watching your videos and stuff. Just like the way that you like tell a story before you even jump into like a movie review was like the Skinamarink one. Not to date this video, but like the Skinamarink video was like, holy shit, yeah, no, I could totally picture this, and like it really like you have a gift. And it was a pleasure listening to you tell the story about Billiam, so aptly named the Bard.
Thank you.
Yes. I can't remember what the question I had was, except for like if you play D&D, if you have any stories. So I think that's pretty well answered. Yeah, I can't wait to hear what other folks have to say about this. So one of the cornerstones of Wholesome Halloween, which is kind of how I found your channel, is that you want to, at least as I understand it, you want to look at horror in a positive light and kind of avoid like the negativity and stuff like that.
Yeah. So my stance on horror is there's this perception of horror that it's like it's a genre where just, you know, teens are killed off or people are tortured or, you know, it's just blood and gore and violence for the sake of violence. And there is a lot of that in horror. But for me, I enjoy what I consider to be wholesome horror. And wholesome horror is the kind of nickname I've given to what I believe a lot of great horror is. Like most great horror, I think, fits under this bracket. And that is, it can be horror that is literally wholesome. So, you know, something like Hocus Pocus is kind of like a wholesome, fun movie, like campy Halloween stuff. But it's also, for me, it's a kind of ideological approach to horror where you do not have contempt for the characters who suffer within your narrative. You are on their side, and even though people will die and violence will occur through the duration of the movie, generally speaking, people will come out the other end of it having gained something. Like that's kind of like my entire horror vibe. Like I want a character you can make a character suffer as much as you want, but at the end, even if they're like worse off generally, there'll be like one facet of them that has like overcame the odds or developed a confidence, or because to me, like the uses and gratifications and catharsis of horror is not the darkness, but learning that the darkness can be defeated. And that's kind of my whole approach with Wholesome Halloween, just to sort of be like, hey guys, like look at horror in this way, please, because that's how I like it.
Yeah. Instead of being, like you said, having contempt for the characters, you know, cheering for the slasher necessarily to murder all the teens. Like sometimes it's good to like have a story out there where good prevails more or less, or at least you come away with something.
Yeah,
Something
because
good.
it doesn't even have to be that good prevails. It just has to like it has to if bad prevails, it has to have a point. So like that miners strike movie I'm writing now, like the miners can't win because historically they didn't. They lost
Yeah.
the strike. They didn't. The mines closed. But throughout the duration of the narrative, the scabs who abandoned their community through the horror of encountering these monsters find community again. And even though, lots of people are going to die in this film, spoilers, if it ever comes out, it's just something I'm writing. Like, I don't know if that'll ever get made.
In the story.
Even though lots of people are going to, the story, lots of people are going to die, lots of people are going to suffer, but somebody who lost community is going to learn about community. And even though it's going to have a sad ending, even though it's not going to end happily because it can't, that is something we can hold on to. And that's all I need.
Absolutely. Yeah. I agree. I think that makes horror so much more fulfilling, I guess is the word that I'm looking for, or at least that my brain found while scrambling around a little bit for words. I feel like that's a great way to look at it, and a great approach to take, like with a story like that. That if it can't just be bleakness for the sake of bleakness, it has to have there has to be a reason behind it. So yeah. So one of the things I've been trying to do in the more recent episodes, kind of staying on topic like that, is I'm trying to put monsters in like some place where you might not think of, monsters, like concepts, like for monsters that you might not necessarily think of offhand. And one of the things that I thought of with regards to like wholesome Halloween is like positivity and joy and happiness and stuff like that. Typically when you think of monsters, they're wreaking havoc and causing terror and things like that. But I'm curious what you think would happen if we had a monster where the entire point was to spread happiness. What kind of story do you think we could build around that idea?
I think you can have a monster who sort of like a mimic or something like Ko the Face Stealer from Avatar. I don't know if that's something your viewers will be familiar with. But the idea I have at the top of my head is a monster who is born lonely. They exist as this kind of like Swamp Thing creation that just emerge from nothing. And there's very few of them. They have no community. They have no sense of friendship or anything like that. And they're just this harmless but deeply, deeply, deeply lonely creature. And what they survive on is the warmth of companionship. And so what they do is they have the ability to change shape and mimic things. And rather than use that for insidious means, they use that for the morally grey area of morphing into people's dead children and dead family members and spending time with the grieving as that person.
I love that idea.
And they still are perceived as monsters because if they get found out, it's obviously there's that kind of uncomfortable imposter quality to it. Yeah. So they are like hunted and there's like this part you can get like a kind of McCarthy witch trial thing going on with the plot where it's like a kid goes missing and then emerges from the forest and it's like, oh, they're a little bit different, and it's like, are they traumatized or are they one of these mimics? Who knows? Like,
yeah,
so these monsters will kind of come out and they'll like be able to take someone's memories of who a person was, and they'll become that person. And so they'll like often hang around with like elderly widows who maybe don't know that their partner's died because they're going through like dementia or something, and they'll just literally spend time with those people as their loved ones, as their missing loved ones, and feed off of that warmth and that companionship that never get themselves, being these creatures born of isolation and no description, and like no, like not of any parentage, and they'll live in this kind of like morally gray area where like essentially they are trying to spread happiness, but they're not entirely fully cognizant of the human spectrum of emotion. So, sometimes it doesn't go too well for them. Like, like a mother who's just buried her son is not going to respond positively to a monster showing up on her doorstep taking the shape of her son. But they genuinely mean no harm, and they seek to comfort the grieving. And yeah, I think that's kind of interesting angle to take things from, because of the human mistrust of them that comes from a place of emotion and their genuine desire to spread warmth and receive warmth in return. And so like that lends itself to these creatures can have their stories go out in a lot of different ways, because one creature might turn up as someone's grieving, as a widow's like departed wife or husband, and be met with complete disdain and complete disgust and offense by the aggrieved, or grieving, not the aggrieved.
Right.
Whereas another might show up and provide a lot of comfort to that person, and there'd be like interesting dynamics of like maybe some of the people who keep them around know that they're monsters but keep them around anyway because it still feels like they can hold on to the person they're grieving a little bit longer. But that's kind of like frowned upon within society, because it's like that's not healthy and that thing's a monster and you don't know what it'll do.
Right.
And yeah, there's lots of angles to take that in. So that would be my good monster.
I was gonna say, so that's really interesting. That would be like kind of taboo for them to kind of keep them around. You mentioned like they would do kind of like witch trial kind of things with them. Do you think that any kind of monster like this would I don't know, like defend itself using violence? Because it seems like these would be more or less like pacifist monsters. They would just be like, off-putting.
They have individual personalities. So there's few of them in the world, but the ones that exist, they've had no upbringing of which to speak of. So any sort of worldview or like ideology has kind of manifested purely from their experience. And so if they are met with abject cruelty, they might react with abject cruelty. If they are met with kindness and initially and then come across cruelty, then they may react to that cruelty with kindness from the kindness they had cultivated beforehand. They are very much a nature-nurture creature without the nature side. Like their nature doesn't really come into it.
So very much more like how you nurture it is kind of how it reacts to situations like
so
meeting
like
a widow.
There's definitely like a scenario where one monster might be hunted down in the form of like, they're taken on the form of like a little boy that someone lost, and then the village react really negatively to it and it kind of like runs away. Another one might like turn into the monster and sort of fight back. And then, there's equally the scenario that like if say there was suspicion of a monster within the midst, because they mimic anything, and let's say a whole family or a whole bunch of kids go missing in the forest and then they all return, and there's suspicion amongst the town of like maybe one of these kids is a mimic.
Yeah.
Maybe all of them are. We don't know. We don't know if they died out there and this is the mimics coming back, or if they just went missing and came back. And then that sets up a kind of like McCarthyism witch hunt where like some of the village, like, you know, some of the parents are like, it's not my baby, like they're my baby, don't take them away from us, like don't do this to me again. I've nearly lost them once, and they're like, no, that's a mimic. And it might be like, if we take these monsters as having individual personalities, you could do stories where one of the monsters might kind of keep on the down low if somebody else was being fingered for their crimes. If somebody else was being suspected of being the mimic, they might just be like, well, I'm not going to say anything. I'm quite happy with my fake mom here.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to continue to be this pretend child, and they can burn the real child at the stake if they so wish. But then another monster who mimics into a family that might really practice kindness and care for others might actively come forward to and reveal themselves to protect somebody suspected of the crime of being them.
Right. Again, depending on like the individual personalities. Like if they're more of a selfish thing, then they might do that.
Yeah, so the core tenet of their personality is that they are born alone and crave warmth, and this is the method through which they seek it. Other than that, everything else is down to the experiences they get when seeking that warmth.
Makes sense to me. Do we... So we know that it can take the form of other people to kind of comfort the grieving, comfort folks who have like lost a loved one. Do we think that it has another form outside of, I guess, human form?
It has a standard monster form that it is originally born as, and I kind of see that as like almost Swamp Thing looking, or Clayface from Batman, just to have that kind of malleability of the skin, and its skin can kind of be alive and form into different shapes and textures and things. So yeah, it kind of exists as like a sort of like liquid golem.
Okay, cool. I like that idea.
I'm not sure how you pronounce that word, actually.
No, I think it is. I think you're right. That's the way I pronounce it anyway. I mean, I think that adding the extra little like gol to the word kind of does it. Well, I think that's more like Gollum from Lord of the Rings. Like you want.
Yeah, that's why I was like liquid golem maybe is the correct term.
Yeah. But either way, it's that's really interesting. But obviously we don't want to be like exactly like Swamp Thing / Clayface. So maybe what are some things that could set it apart?
It's born of nature, so it would be like part like its skeletal form, like the skeleton within it is branches.
Oh, okay. I like that idea. Is branches.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so like in its monster form, you might say it has like almost like an exoskeleton of branches that like as its liquid clay is kind of forming around it, and that can be like one of the tests they use to test it, where they cut it open, but like it's obviously like a horrible scenario for like a kid to go through, but it's not enough because they can fake the blood. It's not enough to cut just and see if it bleeds. They have to cut through to the bone.
Oh.
And the bone, if the bone is branch and wood, then it's the monster.
That's great. To the bone. That's I wasn't expecting this to go like, even though I said like a monster that does something with positivity, I didn't expect it to go so like horrifying. But I like that idea.
Horror, man. It's my thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Like ultimately, what they're doing is wholesome, but you got to put the horror in there because it's not a monster. It's the honest genre. It's the honest genre. That's how I perceive it. It's a genre that engages with some of the dark elements, but looks for the nice bits in between.
Yeah, I mean, we went from like this is a kind of a Twilight Zone monster to this is a monster that like will result in some trauma. Yeah.
Here's the thing. Not if the place it goes to is nice. If the town's just chill, it will be the chillest fucking monster. It'll be beloved by the community. So the only horror it brings into any environment is the horror that people bring onto it.
Yeah.
It is a reflection of the state of the community it enters.
That's a great point. I mean, because I was just thinking like, yeah, if you have people who are like really judgmental, like you said, like it's kind of like a McCarthy witch hunt kind of thing, where if you're just like absolutely opposed to this kind of thing like existing, then yeah, you'll go out of your way to like hunt it down. But like if you're in like a hippie commune or something like that, where they're just like hanging out and stuff, and this guy shows up and he's been missing for 2 weeks, but he looks like he's totally fine. Not
Yeah, and
nothing wrong
the
there.
one creature that'll find like the one creature of these that'll find true happiness will be the one that enters a community that realizes it's a mimic, accepts it, and doesn't need it to pretend to be anything else. And
Yeah.
so it'll be the one version of this creature that will be the happiest and the most sort of nourished and achieve its goals will be the one that literally just walks around as this big tree based clay face thing in amongst this community and just as a member of their society without needing to put on a human skin.
I love that as a message as well, just because it's like it's so true. Like if you don't have to walk around in the skin of somebody else, you're probably going to be a lot happier. Like
Yeah.
period.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's a thing that could be. I don't want to say preached more, but that could be a thing that like a message that's put out more is like acceptance is a lot better than tolerance. Like you shouldn't
Yes.
have to.
Yeah.
You shouldn't have to put on like this facade of like this missing child in order to be accepted. Like if you're not going to harm anybody, then like you're okay to like. And I think that's another thing that came to mind as well was that another way they could tell if it's one of these mimics is that it would not age in theory because it wouldn't have another like point of reference for this
Yeah.
child like
Yeah.
as it got older or like
Yeah, because it makes its form based off of people's memories.
true. Yeah, I was just thinking like it would see it, but yeah, if it makes it off of people's memories, that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah. So if you remember your wife who died at 30 or your husband who died at 40 or your son who died at 5, then your last memory of them is that version of them. It will take that version of them, but then it doesn't have a point of reference to grow old or what that person looks like old.
Right. Ooh, it's also a little bit tragic. Um, mm, 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 mm. What else should we add to this guy? Because I think he's pretty good on his own. You said that there's like a few. It's not like there's many of them. Um, I don't know. Like, how many would we say there would be like throughout the world? Like, if there are multiple, like, do they live like the last monster, like in clusters? Like,
In
do
the
they?
in the entire world, and I don't know enough about D&D to know how like big and populated the world would be, but like if we equate it to like our real world, like in the entire world there's maybe 1,000, so enough that people know about it, but they're basically an extremely endangered species.
All right.
So the suspicion of them can be there because people know they exist and people believe they could be lurking about town. And there will certainly be towns where there is no mimicking and they have never stepped foot into that town. And that town is constantly harassing its own like society in search of these mimics.
Yeah.
And they just aren't there. But yeah, that's a kind of the number I would expect. So lots of them, but enough that they are so spread out they will never meet each other, but enough that they're also known and could be a constant quote unquote threat.
Yeah.
Even though they're not a threat.
I like that idea. And I'm also picturing them like as being hatched from eggs because like if they're going to be like motherless, like without love, like that kind of thing, then like maybe they're just like left behind and
I think they are birthed from the earth, but
birthed from the earth.
if you want eggs, you can have some eggs.
I'm a little bit hungry.
And the logic of them being birthed from the earth is it kind of gives them this sort of like, child of Gaia sort of vibe. And it gives them like an ethereal quality where it's like how, like they almost, there could be like theories about them that like they exist as like tests for humanity. Like that's the Earth's way of saying like can this creature that is constructed of me be treated with the kindness that it deserves, and if you treat it with kindness it'll flourish. If you treat it with shitty, it'll go shitty. Like, if you pollute the water's gonna go shitty. Like, it's that kind of the vibe, and it becomes this sort of like the fact that it's birthed from the earth, gives it that sort of motherless quality. Like, I literally just say like just a random field in the middle of nowhere that's never had anything eventful happen into it. Suddenly this thing just emerges from a crevice that forms and kind of comes up, and it brings up the grass with it and branches as parts of its body.
That's pretty cool. I like that idea a lot better than eggs. I'm not going to midichlorian it up, so yeah, I like that. What should we call this guy? Seeing as Mimic is already taken.
Yeah, it's a good question.
I don't think we could call it Billiam. I don't think we could get away with that again.
No. You could give them like a kind of like just a name like where they don't really have a name, but they kind of have a label. So they're just called the Mournful.
I like that.
They don't really have a name. That's like a name that civilization gets them. The Mournful. They are these lonely golems, haunted to walk the earth in search of a comfort and kindness they can never receive, because the comfort that they receive and the warmth they receive is only ever given in the memory of somebody else that they are not. Until, one day, like, a society just completely accepts one, and it's like, hey, mission accomplished.
Yeah.
But yeah, the Mournful. Did I say the Mournful? Or did
I got the Mournful. I wrote down lonely golems as well. Another one I thought of was like maybe like the terry cloth golems or something, but they're not made out of terry cloth, so it doesn't make any sense. Just like thinking about the terry cloth thing with like the monkeys that study from way back in the day. My brain's just kind of all over the place, so don't mind me. But I like the Mournful. That's a good one as well. Okay, so the Mournful, I might combine those names, do the Mournful Grievers or the Mournful Golems. Or
the Mournful Grievers sounds kind of cool.
Yeah.
You could also call them the Pained.
Oh, the Pained. That's a good one. The Pained.
Because again, it has that ambiguity. It's like people taking it at face value. It's like, well, it must be evil. They have pain in their name.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, but they are the pains. They are the ones that are hurting. They are the ones that are lonely.
Like, hey, guess what? That spoiler alert for Naruto, but in Naruto, there's a guy called Pain. There's a whole bunch of guys called Pain, in fact. And they're not actually that evil when you think about it. Just kind of messed up. Yeah. Okay, that sounds good. I also was thinking like maybe they have many different names because it's probably more like a local like lore kind of thing in a lot of other places, maybe places where they're kind of shut off from the world. They don't necessarily know what the Mournful are, but maybe they know what the Pained are or what the Grievers are. So kind of like how everybody in zombie movies refuses to say zombies.
Yeah, I think societies within different cultures can have different names for them, and I think those names can reflect that society's kindness towards them.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
One society that thinks they're evil might call them something like the Grief Bringers, implying that they bring the grief, and then another society can call them the Mournful, implying that they are the ones who are mourning.
And then like maybe some of the other ones who are more accepting of it, instead of like the grief bringers, they'll be the grief takers because they yeah. All right, nice. Okay, so that one has a bunch of different names, just like the many different faces it will inevitably take on over its lifespan. Do we think that it would like take the face of the people who like it's trying to relieve them of their pain once they pass away, because no doubt the community would miss them then, or would it just stay in that form? I know what we're trying to move on.
I think if we keep on the theme of it being lonely, I think it would take on the form of the person who it was comforting after they pass, so that it can look at its own reflection.
Because then it's like also giving itself.
Presumably within these relationships, you know, if it shows up to be the fake husband of a dying widow, it would become, you know, that person's family. It would grow to love that person, and then when that person passes, it becomes the artifice of that person that passes, and then it has to wrestle with the complicated emotion of looking at itself in the mirror as the person that it once loved, that it lost, and knowing that it is an artifice of that person, and knowing that that's what they gave the person they loved before that passed. And it's kind of like becomes like a thing where it wrestles with its own, with what it provides, and it becomes sentient of what it actually is giving to people. And for some of these golems, that may be that they look in the mirror and they see a face they once loved, and they are happy, they are comforted by it, much as the golems may comfort some grieving people. But then other golems might look in the mirror, see the person they once loved, and almost be disgusted at themselves of like, well, that's not, you know, my fake mom. That's me pretending to be my fake mom. That's not my fake brother. That's me pretending to be my fake brother. And coming to terms with the realization of like, so this is what artifice feels like, and that's what I gave them, and I loved them.
Yeah.
And wrestling with that kind of reality of grief and what we hold on to. They're very tragic creatures.
I was going to say, that's really sad for being based in joy.
They spread joy and warmth if they are given the opportunity to. They're just a little bit tragic.
Absolutely. I love it. There are some great stories to be made from that, some great messages to be told, and yeah, I really, really like our grievers or the grief bringers or takers or the pained or the mournful or whatever myriad name you decide to call them. That's a great one. So the thing that I do, another special little feature of the show, is that I like to ask my previous guest to give me the name of a monster for the next guest to do. So this one comes courtesy of the guest from episode 8, Hachiko, and he picked the name Dopplerwolf because that's apparently some kind of reference with their friend. I don't know. I was not privy to that. So, so the last monster we're doing today is the Doppler wolf. So I'm curious. It's kind of like on the nose with the wolf part. But what do you picture?
Doppler brings to mind the idea of doppelgangers.
Ooh, okay.
So I almost feel like it's a doppelganger of somebody, but instead of taking on the form of what they look like as a person, it is their werewolf. Like, without them being a werewolf, it is like it is what they would look like and act like as a werewolf. And maybe that leads to events where they commit some kind of werewolfy acts, you know, massacres, slaughters, kill some sheep, kill some drunks on a night out, and somehow that leads back to the person who they are doppling. I don't know if that can be used as an adjective. Becoming framed for those acts.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, maybe they mimic like their clothing and stuff like that as well. So they'll be like, well, there's a thing from like your wardrobe right over there, and like you're saying you haven't seen it, so therefore, could just easily frame them for a crime.
They could like use like they could like dig their homes under the houses of the people that they are doppling. I'm going to keep using doppling as an adjective, even though it probably doesn't make sense. Doubling, the people they are doubling. They could like create houses in sort of like by digging like little dens underneath their homes, and then that leads to things like bones being found on the property of this person. So they're werewolves who get away with it. That's what they are.
Very
and
nice.
Somebody else has to pay the price for it.
It kind of reminds me of, and I can't remember what it's called, but there's this phenomenon of people living inside of other people's houses, like without them knowing it. And I felt like it was, I don't think it's called turtling. Turtling is the phrase that comes to mind, but I don't think that's what it's called.
Yeah, I know what you mean, though. I know what you mean.
Yeah.
I've seen lots of like horror stories on Reddit where like people are living in the attics and things.
Yeah, where they're like living in their cupboards or like in the crawl space or whatever. Like
scary.
Yeah, for sure. So I could totally see that working with something like this, and then people being like, well, obviously somebody else is living in my house, and it kind of drives like paranoia and things of that nature. So to kind of go back to something we were talking about earlier, excuse me. To kind of go back to something we were talking about earlier, the message for this guy would probably be a little bit similar to the last one, where it's like it might, well, not really, because it's not really a McCarthyite kind of thing, like where they're trying to track something down.
I think we can add another layer to it as well. I think we can have, because there's that whole thing of like wolf bonding, like it's like a thing that comes up in fiction. I'm pretty sure, where like wolves like will bond with a human or something.
Yeah.
All the time. It's kind of like the way we domesticate dogs and stuff. So I feel like the wolf can bond with a human, and that's the human that they become the wolf form of, and sort of accidentally, I don't even know if they intentionally frame the humans for these acts. I think they accidentally do it. They just want to like live by the sides of the humans and stuff. I think another layer could be that if they are killed, that bond they have with the human they pick is like a supernatural bond, and the human will die too.
Ooh.
And then
so yeah, they really would get away with it.
Yeah, and then it kind of becomes like maybe like a thing of toxic relationships or something there, like the destructive ways it brings you both down and like there's kind of like gaslighting there a little bit, with like the human might not even know the werewolf's like living with them and doing these things, and there's something there. It needs more work than the other two ideas, but there's the
seed is there.
The seed of an idea. Hey,
yeah,
the seed of an idea is there.
All right,
because the reason I'm like not too fussed on it is the idea of like killing it also kills you sort of diminishes the metaphor, because then that kind of implies that getting out of a toxic relationship is bad for the person who gets out of it, and it'll just destroy them. And I'm like, that's not really how I want to go. The metaphor falls apart a bit there, but there's something to it. I'm just not sure what it is yet.
Maybe it could be like, I was gonna go like really corny there for a second, be like, the truth will set you free kind of thing, and I'm like, that's not the case here at all. That's not at all what we've discussed. But I agree.
Oh, it could be learning to live with your demons.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, that's a really good lesson.
The only way to protect yourself from the death that it could bring to you when all of the things to hunt it is to domesticate it.
Ah, domesticate your demons.
Mm-hmm.
Oh. I like that.
That's a tight meaning and intention, and lends itself to more stories.
And it would be a good little tagline too.
Yeah, and it's a nice tagline. Yeah, and then it becomes kind of like almost like a Babadook character of like it torments and destroys your life. But if you can just, invite it in, accept that it's a challenge and it's a struggle and you're going to have to live with it, then you save yourself in doing that because you can protect it and it can protect you. And it becomes a mental health thing.
Right. And then if you were to notice that this stuff was happening and you would invite that like Dopplerwolf inside.
Yeah, and it should be dangerous to you as well. Like it should be threatening to you. Like it's not like, oh, I like this human, so I'm going to bother everybody else, but not that. Like it should be a dangerous thing to have under your house, and it would just as easy kill you as it would anybody else. And so you have to not let it do that. You have to tame it.
Have to tame it. Good idea.
And then because it's a wolf as well, depression has the nickname with a lot of people of the black dog.
Yeah, I remember
so it
that.
Becomes, it becomes the black dog, but a physical, literal black dog that is dangerous and could take your life if it's destroyed.
I've always wanted to kind of work that into a story somehow, and like I didn't expect to like find it here, but that's a cool idea. Yeah, I think that it makes perfect sense that like because if you don't harness your internal demons and stuff like that, it could also obviously it could kill you in the end, which in turn like would end those demons, but you also are dead. So
yeah,
nobody wins in that situation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is a negative entity that is without your say in it, without your decision mattering, implicitly connected to you that you have to learn to live with or face potentially dire consequences if you let it overtake your life. And yeah, I like the idea of like if you really get it under wraps, you guys could become good buddies.
Yeah. Then you just give it like the little dog chow or whatever, and it's like, oh well, this isn't the same thing as eating people or like chickens or something. But hey,
right, that shit in the bottle.
Yeah, exactly. You just that's a great idea. And it'd be kind of weird though if it started like, well, if it's behaving like you in your werewolf form, I guess it wouldn't look like you like period. It would just like it would look like a werewolf with like certain characteristics reflective of you. So
yeah,
it's not the same thing as like riding yourself into battle.
There'll be like things like if you have a scar here, then it's like that's a wolf, but it's a wolf with a scar here, and it's like if you're missing this tooth, the wolf's missing that tooth.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's like a little dark side that just kind of hangs around you. It is the id to your ego and super ego.
Very nice. Very nice. I like that. Is there anything else we need to add to this guy? I think that's. Like
I think he's done. I think once you get it away from toxic relationships and you make it about
internal conflict,
the internal conflict, then it writes itself, and I think it is just this dark image of you that you have to learn to live with.
Yeah, absolutely.
Dopplerwolf.
Yeah,
and it can be like a stigmatized thing as well. Like, oh, that person's got a Dopplerwolf. Some people aren't cool about it. Some people aren't accepting of it. It's
are you implying that there could be issues with like people perceiving people with mental health as being dangerous?
Yeah, and and so see, it just once you get what it's about, the thing creates itself.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I really like it. I didn't know when I initially saw Dopplerwolf, I was like, okay, this is gonna be like a wolf that like manipulates the weather, like kind of thing, because the Doppler radar, like tracks like. Anyway, but I like that one a lot better. That's much cooler. Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's gonna do it for this episode. Dan, if there's any place you do, what would you like to plug? Where can people find you and look into your work?
So the most important thing for us right now is please, if you're into horror games, if you're interested in horror games at all, fill out the survey on creatorvc.com/Terrorbytes. TERRORBYTES. Bytes. You can also actually go to terrorbytesdoc.com, but depending on when this comes out, that redirect may have a little security warning on it. The site is completely safe if you want to go that way and just advance through to it. But yeah, creativec.com/terabytes, terrorbytesdoc.com will just redirect to that first site. And yeah, there's a trailer on there. Check out the synopsis. Fill out your survey with your thoughts. That would help me astronomically right now. It would be so useful for us with making the documentary, and it will help get the documentary made with a really established and professional team who have so many connections in this industry. You know, I mentioned In Search of Darkness before, but they've actually just come off the back of I wasn't involved in this one. They've come off the back of the very first gaming documentary they did, which was possibly the biggest gaming documentary ever, one called FPS Doc. It was like a 5-hour long mega doc going through the entire history of the FPS genre. And it really was really good. I enjoyed it thoroughly, and I hope to do the same with horror, because don't know if you've got it from this conversation, but I'm a little bit of a horror guy. I'm a little guy, if you will, who likes horror. Just I never would have guessed.
That's incredible.
And then other than that, you can follow my YouTube channel, Dan Drambles. Follow us on Instagram, Twitter. That's just at Dan Drambles everywhere, or at Dan_Drambles on one of them. I can't remember the way around. I think it's Dan_Drambles on Twitter. No, on Instagram, and Dan Drambles on Twitter. You can find us. If you search Dan Drambles, like, there's not many Drambles surnames going around. You'll probably get us. But I'm on Twitter, I'm on Instagram, and yeah, I think that's about it. And YouTube, of course.
Oh, of course.
Which is where the main place I'll be putting everything, including, if I ever get round to it, although I've got a million projects to get through before I get there, including the animated version of the story I told earlier in this podcast about Billiam and Leonis and their friendship that transcends the false Hydra.
That's incredible. Thanks again for making time again to swing by and hang out with us and make some monsters. It was a great time. Obviously, if you ever want to talk or anything like that, come back on the show. Feel free to hit me up. I would be more than happy to have you on. That's Dan Drambles everywhere on the internet. You can go and find him. Thanks again, Dan. And everybody listening, I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and I'll talk to you all later. Okay, bye. Thanks again for listening to Just a Little Guy. A special thanks goes out to our patrons who continue to make this show possible, especially those who subscribe at our incomprehensible cosmic abomination level. Those patrons include Taru Tikkanen, D. Solari, and Lunchbox. As ever, if you'd like to support the show, check out our Patreon at patreon.com/justalittleguy. Want to check out Dan Drambles' work, but don't want to do all that pesky typing? Well, don't worry. I've compiled all the links that we discussed in this episode and included them in the description. Thanks again for listening, and as always, be aware of your Dopplerwolf. You are not Dan Drambles. You are my cat. You are a scaredy. Why are you up here? I just told you to get down. Why must you interrupt me? Why? Why? You are so distracting with your fuzziness. I am never going to get this podcast done. You goofball. Yes. Okay. Come on, get down. Good boy. Good boy. Cats, man.